A question for our handful of minutes audience. What's the recipe for an episode of our show? 1 part stupid pictures, 1 part talking too fast, and... oh yes, 5 parts utter bullshit.
Right then, for those times when an unaltered reality just isn't cutting it, you've got a few options. Drugs, alcohol, spinning around until you vomit in the air, fall on your back and the vomit lands in your mouth. These are things you can do. But if you want something with a little more class than that last option and a little more legality than the first option, you could do a lot worse than to look at martinis. Unlike beer, wine, or other spirits, martinis are pretty young in the history of alcoholic drinks. There's no clear origin story to them, but there are a few apocryphal tales placing its origin on one coast or the other of the United States during the back end of the 19th century. Part of the appeal of martinis comes from their history of being the favorite drink of various celebrities, artists, and politicians. Hell, if they're good enough for the man who duked it out with Hitler, then they can't be all that bad. Why, thanks to Hemingway having downed his fair share, while writing most of his most famous works, many a young author has tried to feed off of the ghost of his talent by draining martinis down their gullet like some sort of ghost-sucking machine, like in Ghostbusters where they shoot Hemingway's ghost with their ghost-busting dicks, and Slimer makes me question my own sexuality with his slippy slip slap slip slap all wet and gooey and slap slip. You know, looking at my script here, I can't say as I'm entirely convinced that there's any merit to this idea. Well anyways, there's no denying that with a martini, form takes precedence over function. The glass looks stylish and there are many little variations on it, but a common thread running through them all is how easy it is to spill your drink. They're also far less durable than their natural predator, the beer stein. Also, I'm sorry ladies, but the hourglass figure is pretty much always going to be more popular than the martini glass figure. Part of the fun of making martinis is screwing around with all the different recipes and experimenting. This can seem a little intimidating, but that will eventually work in your favor as you get good at it, because people will generally be pleased and even a little impressed when you make one for them. Plus, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Mixing a martini is kind of like my dick that time I caught an episode of The Golden Girls where Rose accidentally booked them all into a nudist resort. It's just not that hard. It's just that, not unlike with wine tasting, there have been a lot of purists who've done everything they can to keep the Happy Special Super Mega Martini Mixer Club more exclusive by building up a mystique of technique to try and keep the rabble out of their gin-soaked ivory towers. However, as I say, it's actually pretty straightforward. Most recipe books will list parts, and I'll tell you right now that a part is traditionally an ounce or 1 shot glass. But you don't even have to get that technical. I generally use the cap of the mixer and give or take a bit depending on the size of the cap. Then 1 part, 2 part, 3 parts. Shake it all around, then pour it into the glass and voila. Add olives, lemon wedges, lime wedges, or whatever garnish gets you going. I should warn you that some recipes will look to add up to 6 or even more parts, and in those cases you'll want to divide the numbers down so you're only using 3 or 4 ounces. Too much more, and you won't be mixing a martini so much as a series of bad decisions with profound regret for a chaser. There are also plenty of online resources that can be really useful if you want to take this further, and I've linked to a few of them at the Perfectly Wonderful and Horrible Things page over on handfulofminutes.com. Everything your own drinks is pretty straightforward, really. I mean, just think about things that go well together in the kitchen, like food or candy, and use that as a guideline. Then you get to have the fun of naming your drink, either with something appropriate or with something a little more eclectic. Of course, if you want to get a lot of bottles to experiment with, you are going to have to splash out a reasonable amount of money up front, or build your bar gradually over time, but gradually over time, that's not instant gratification. That's not the first world way. Glasses aren't so bad though if you stick to relatively basic ones and get a good set for a good price. However, the fancier ones do cost more, not unlike most other products. It must be pretty obvious by now that I may as well have the ghost of Frederick H. Martini's hand up my ass. But are martinis for you? Well, if everything I've said up till now still hasn't helped you decide, then I guess I'm just going to have to turn over to some words from the most famous members of the Martini Pantheon.
Well, those certainly were some historical figures there, Oliver. Or should I say, hysterical figures? No, I don't think I should. I also shouldn't have tried to pay that prostitute with a traveler's check, but that's another story.
Why, thanks to Hemingway having downed his fair share while writing some of his most famous works, many is a young author who has tried to suck off of his What?